passes over.
Make a motion to approve the minutes from the November 12th, 2024 meeting, as well as the non-public session that followed.
I'll second that.
Questions or comments? All approved?
Thank you.
All right. At this point, we will open up the floor for public comment. Melissa, has anyone come forward?
No, Chairman, at this time, nobody has come forward.
Okay. Moving on to school highlights with Dr. Cheney.
All right. Hi, everyone. So a quick enrollment update. My enrollment on here actually reflects a 1 student decrease from the last time I was here with the board in September. But since I've written this report, we've had 5 new enrollments that will be starting after the Thanksgiving break. So we are continuing to grow at the Central School. So some of the things that we've been up to is we hosted a Screenagers Elementary Edition evening with the Southern Rockingham County group, SoRock. And this was an evening for parents to come and to learn about screen time boundaries and what students and children are consuming for digital media and things of that nature. So this was a partnership between SoRock, our district social worker Julie Barbick, as well as her interns Eve Hodgkin and Abby Landry. Although it was a small group of attendees, there was a robust conversation about how to monitor things and support students in this digital age. And anybody who's interested is welcome to reach out to our counseling team for more information. They've amassed quite a few resources to share with families. We held our first Lunch Buddy event a couple weeks ago. We will be holding one monthly in January, February, March, April, and May. So any interested families should reach out and join us. That's always such a fun event, not only for the parents of the child that are there and the child of the parent, but all of the children at that table. They really get to have an interaction with an adult that they may not know. There was even just this really cute interaction where the parent was here, another child was here, and their child was sitting way over there chatting with their friends. But the parent was just so endeared to meet a new friend. We're in field trip season. Field trips have begun. Grade 2 took a visit to the Stockbridge Theater at Pinkerton Academy to see Pout Pout Fish. Our 4th graders visited the Capitol in early November, and grade 3 is headed to their swimming field trip in the first week of December. We were also lucky enough to have the Pinkerton student ambassadors visit our kindergarten students to share information about high school and their hopes and dreams beyond. Fire safety is in the month of October, and Mrs. Chrissa partnered with our classroom teachers and the Hampstead Fire Department to bring the firefighters on site to meet all of our students. The students have a chance to ask questions, get to know more about what a firefighter's job is, but most importantly, learn that these folks are community helpers, and if you see them and they ever need to be at your residence, that they are there to help and support you. We held a Veterans Day assembly, and we had more than 60 veterans represented in our annual slideshow this year. We asked the folks in our school community to share photos of veterans that are related to our students or our staff. Our grade 4 chorus sang some patriotic songs, and that was our first full school assembly of the year. It was a joyous event, and we are grateful to the folks in our school community and their family members who have served our country. On Friday, November 15th, we held another assembly to open our internal post office, the We Deliver Post Office. We had the postmaster from the East Hampstead Post Office join us to administer the oath of office to the 4th graders who have applied to work at the We Deliver this year. And our first mail delivery of the year was last Friday, the 22nd, and we delivered an unprecedented 235 pieces of mail. So quite a few pieces of mail for our very first delivery. Students often write to peers in other classes, different staff they work with, and other friends in our school. Just after the We Deliver assembly, our grade 2 students shared some information about kindness with us. They worked closely with their teachers and Mr. Schmidt to present ways to be a good citizen. These ideas came from our 2nd graders, and they included things like honoring other people's hula hoop space, so their bubble, giving people physical space, including others, being respectful and responsible, cleaning up after yourself, waiting patiently and taking turns, using a low voice, keeping the bathroom clean, that was very important to our 2nd graders, and walking quietly in the hallways, lining up orderly, and being kind and helping others. Those posters that they created and presented to our full school community have now been hung up in our cafeteria as a point of reference. So as students are working on learning some of these behaviors, we can direct them to these posters and remind them of the shared opportunity together. Recently, our grade 4 students held their election for the student council for this year. Many students participated by creating campaign posters and writing speeches to present to their peers. It was a lot of fun to walk through the hallways to see the different platforms, if you will, that students were running on. Community service, more math, extra reading, let's have additional recesses, things like that. The election was a success with 2 students from each classroom elected. We did have 2 classrooms that had a tie, so we have 2 classrooms with 3 members this year. The student council has met once to date, and they wanted to jump right in on that community service platform, and they are hosting a winter clothing drive that will occur during the month of December. Volunteers, we're still looking for more volunteers. It's a great way to get involved through our Lunch Buddy program. There are lots of field trips coming up besides the ones that we've mentioned tonight. So anyone interested in volunteering or supporting us at HCS, we're happy to have you. And finally, I'm excited to let you know that the Central School was selected by the New Hampshire Lottery Commission in a contest that occurred on social media. Families nominated schools to have a visit from the group Recycled Percussion from the Chaos and Kindness TV show. They have chosen HCS, and the band will be coming to perform for our students in December. So, are there any questions?
I'll just say I think the We Deliver program is awesome. My kids came home, came home with letters from peers in their grade level and outside of their grade level, and I think it ties into the whole kindness theme really well because it's just so nice and thoughtful and kind to receive a letter from one of your friends. It's really cool. Also really excited to hear about the Chaos and Kindness. What an awesome experience for those kids to get to see. Any questions or comments for Dr. King?
No, I too am glad that the We Deliver is going. My kids are older, but I still find their letters and they're hilarious. So it's super cute. And yeah, I would love to know when that Chaos and Kindness is.
You got it.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank Moving on to current business, we have student services with Melissa McDonald.
Good evening. I'm excited to be able to share with you a little bit about our Student Services Department and how things are going so far this fall. So I wanted to start with a little bit more about our team. We are fortunate to have a lot of staff that support us. Administratively, there's Francine Flynn as our Assistant Director and Charles Anglin, new to us, as our Building Coordinator. We have one full-time support staff and one part-time support staff that is also shared with the front office of the middle school. We have a number of school and district-wide staff members as well as our contract service providers. I know there have been some questions about our contracted service providers, and I wanted to just mention that we have 3 different reasons for needing to contract services. There could be the need in any of our out-of-district placements to fulfill IEP services. It could be positions that are posted within our district, and because we're not able to hire the staff at the moment, we are contracting those staff in because they are still needs. Or it could also be IEP services that are extremely specific and we don't have the need for hiring one of these professional staff members into our district, but again, to fulfill those IEP services and needs, we need to make sure that we are contracting. So as we serve all students, this is a list of specifically what does fall under student services purview. So special education, our district preschool program, 504s, counseling, nursing services, ESOL, and McKinney-Vento. And I'll get a little bit more into detail as we go through. So starting with section 504, this is part of the Rehabilitation Act, and this provides students with accommodations that they require due to a major life-altering event that allows them to be able to access their education. So examples of accommodations might be that they need to visit the nurse a certain number of times a day, they need preferential seating, they need breaks built in, a plethora of different accommodations to level the playing field and make sure that they're able to access their education. Currently, less than 1% of our population is on a 504 plan. You can see the number between the 2 buildings, 28 at HCS and 29 at HMS. And those are currently managed by our school counselors. McKinney-Vento. So this federal act provides support and services for families that are experiencing homelessness or who are in transition. Our district social worker, Julie Barbeck, is our McKinney-Vento liaison. She's the one that works with families to determine if they do qualify for McKinney-Vento and to make sure that they are getting the services and the education that they require. Currently, up through grade 8, less than 1% of our population does qualify, but not to minimize that because we do have a number of families. Our English speakers of other languages, also known as ESOL, Nicole Ponte oversees this program. You'll see on this pie chart, we do have 12 students that are qualify under ESOL, and so this is an example of the different languages that are represented between all of these students. When we're looking at qualifications, there is the access assessment that is administered once a year, and this happens between January and March of each school year. And this helps to determine students that would qualify under ESOL for either direct services or for monitoring service. And if a student is put on monitor status, that lasts for up to 4 years. special education. So this is the largest part of our student services department. So as you are aware, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, or IDEA, was originally passed in 1975, has been amended over the years, most recently in 2004. And this ensures that students are provided a free and appropriate public education, otherwise known as FAPE, in their least restrictive environment, also known as LRE. And those are acronyms that are thrown around quite often, but just to put the words to the acronyms. So within our school district, ages 3 up to 22 is encompassed within special education. There are a total of 13 areas of educational disability that are out on the table for qualification. We have students that represent 9 areas of those educational disabilities, and so we have a total number of 277 IEPs ages 3 through 22. That encompasses our 2 schools here in district, our students who attend Pinkerton Academy, and any and all out-of-district placed students. So the 2 graphs here were actually part of a presentation that was made last spring. So these are representative of the 22-23 school year when data was pulled as of June, as well as the 23-24 school year with data pulled as of February. The colors aren't showing up quite the same on this screen as they were on my computer screen, but just for reference, the bottom color, the lighter color, represents students that are currently on IEP, or not currently, sorry, in these graphs on IEPs within each school year. And then the darker color on the top would be students who are not on IEPs. So this is representative of the percentage of students on IEPs at each grade level, pre-K through 8. This is our current data pulled as of November 1st of this school year, and I expanded it to include our high school numbers. These are Hampstead students only. I did not include any of the other towns that feed into Pinkerton because that would not be as accurate of a representation. So what you'll see here is that we have an extremely high number of students within our preschool program who are on IEPs. The idea of preschool is to be an early childhood setting, which means that you want as close to a 50-50 ratio of peer models to students on IEPs. So this is certainly an area where we need to work to recruit more peer models so that we can get closer to that early childhood setting as possible. And this has been revised. We found a calculation error on grades 9 and 12 with the presentation that was sent out to you prior. So those percentages were corrected earlier this afternoon. And then this slide shows the hard numbers. So a breakdown currently of students on IEPs by grade level, including our students who are placed out of district. So instead of providing you with the percentages, these are the actual numbers. And this is where our total of 277 students on IEPs comes from. So to talk a little bit more about out of district, that falls into 2 different categories. We have students who attend private special education placements, and this decision is made by the IEP team in which the parents are present. The overall cost of an out-of-district placement in a private special ed school would include tuition, transportation, and related services. There is also public charter schools that some of our students attend. This placement decision is made by a parent. However, any student who attends a public charter school on an IEP, we are still the district of liability, and so we are still responsible for covering the cost of implementation for those IEP services. So our projected cost for the current school year for all of the above is $2,580,792.70. Under special education, we have other funding and revenue sources. So the next few slides will get into more detail with all three of these categories. We have the IDEA federal grants, which are allocations that run over the course of 27 months. We have special education aid, which is the state fund for reimbursement, and it's supposed to offset the tax rate in the form of revenue. And then Medicaid to schools, which also reimburses the school districts for students' health-related services. So when we are looking at IDEA funding allocations, I know we've had quite a few discussions at some of our board meetings about our IDEA funding and what can and cannot be captured within our grants. So our 22-23 grant just closed on September 30th. So I am currently able to access funds from the 23-24 grant and the 24-25 grant. So you can see the dollar amount in each of those. We have IDEA Part B, and then we have the IDEA preschool funds. So the preschool funds is a much smaller pool of money. That is because the base rate at the state level has not been updated, and so that funding amount is much lower to be able to access. However, the IDEA Part B, that money is increased based on enrollment as well as any increase in free and reduced counts. Special education aid. So I know that this has been a hot topic within the state recently. This is a state fund to reimburse school districts for allowable special education and related services from the previous school year. So what we do as a school district is we are submitting costs for currently our out-of-district students that meet CAP, and I'll get more into that in the coming slides. Our submission of costs is due by August for the previous school year. So August of 2024, we submitted all costs for the previous school year. The state reviews everything, asks for more documentation if needed, and then reimbursement is provided to school districts in January. And just to clarify, allowable costs can include transportation-related services and tuition for placements. What you'll see here is that the special education state fund at the New Hampshire department has not changed in 3 years. So we have 162 school districts in the state of New Hampshire. Any and all of these 162 school districts can be submitting for reimbursement from this pool of money that is not changed. It has remained at $33,917,000 since 2022. So when we're looking at special education aid, we need to reach what's called CAP. So there's a 3.5% for an estimated cost per pupil, and then the cost of that student needs to reach at least the CAP amount, if not more than, in order for us to be able to submit for special education aid. So we're currently submitting costs for students that are placed out of district in our special education private schools. It does not mean that all of these students meet CAP, so we are submitting for those that do. So for the school year that we just had, 2023 to 2024, CAP was $69,697.81. So to put this into real life terms, what I did was I took an example of a student that we actually submitted for, just to put things into perspective. So all in, This particular request for reimbursement was $118,408.10. We had the special education cap was $69,697.81. And so what happened is there was $48,710.29 above the cap that was left. So at the end of this formula, the state is responsible for paying 80% above the cap, and the district is left paying the cap and then 20% of the additional cost. So you will see that the state should be reimbursing $38,969.23 for this particular situation, and we as a school district would be enduring the cost of $79,439.87. There are also situations where you can go 10 times above. And so this, again, is an example of an out-of-district placement that met that number. So we submitted for special education aid for students whose placement was $206,900.48. Again, that's all in. That's tuition, that's related services, that's transportation. The special ed cap was $69,000 and change. So in this particular case, when you meet this excessive dollar amount, we as a school district are liable for the 3.5 times the special education cap plus 20% of the additional costs. The state is responsible for 80% up to 10 times the estimated state expenditure per pupil. So in an ideal world, the state should be responsible for $111,314.81 of that total calculation, and we as a school district would pick up the $95,585.66. So I thought it would be helpful for you to see, just with some of our own numbers within town, how this works.
Can I ask a question real quick? On the 7,763 per pupil?
Yeah, that's the amount 10 times over the estimated cost per pupil.
That's
So-
the adequacy amount, the current adequacy amount for the state? Where does the 7,763 come from?
So the estimated cost per pupil was $19,913.66 in the school year of 23-24. That's a different topic though.
I was wondering where the 7,763 cost per pupil comes from. Because I thought the base adequacy was 4,500. Is that from the?
It is 4,500, and then there is a additional add-on for students in special education.
Okay.
Let me.
All right.
If you give me a minute, I can pull up those.
No,
numbers.
that makes sense. So that's a base adequacy for special ed students. Okay. All right. Thank you.
No problem.
Yeah. Sorry.
So our budget revenue over these past 3 school years, so 21-22, at the 98.3% prorated amount, based on what was submitted for special education aid, the district received back $539,499, which went back to the taxpayers to offset. 22-23, there was the prorated amount decreased. However, there was a higher amount that was submitted for special education aid, which is why that reimbursement amount increased to $610,206. And then what happened this year, as you are aware, is there was a higher amount of money submitted by our New Hampshire school districts to the state for special education aid. With that pool of money of $33 million that has not moved, they had to look at what was being submitted and what they were able to send back for reimbursement, which is why that prorated amount decreased to 67.5%. So We should have been receiving back as a school district $775,331.50. With the prorated amount, we are now projected to receive $523,348.76.
And that's because as a state, they submitted up above 50 million.
You are correct. There was $52 million worth of special education aid submitted in a pool of money of $33 million.
So basically, if the state funded it as much as it did 3 years ago, we would have gotten $250,000 more dollars.
You are correct.
So effectively, the decisions at the state level have made it so that we're absorbing $250,000 more dollars.
As statewide taxpayers, yes. Absolutely. When they are going through their budget season, they could certainly be asking for an increase, knowing that our out-of-district placements are increasing in costs, as well as transportation and all of the other factors that go into this.
Just to correct something you had mentioned, you said that that $250,000 was going on the statewide taxpayers. That's actually going on the local taxpayers.
Yes, that's Hampstead's numbers right there.
Hampstead's, yeah.
Yes, yes.
Is it from state to local?
Exactly.
Okay.
Medicaid to schools is another revenue source for us. This is a personal goal of mine to work on this school year. So we are able to submit for medically based services for students, and it becomes complicated because we are a public school system, so we have to kind of walk between what's medically based and then educating a child within their school. So we submit to a third-party vendor for services rendered. They are able to see who is Medicaid eligible, and then we receive back up to 50% of those services. This number varies greatly from year to year because students their Medicaid eligibility may change throughout the school year. We have students who move out of district who may have been eligible and now we can't submit for them. We have students who move in. So this number does vary. There were also some changes to the law back in 2019, and there's some more changes coming up. We keep hearing about, we haven't heard of them yet, but we're preparing for them. So our 23-24 revenue for Medicaid to schools was $6,302, but my goal is to bring that up for next school year. And this slide just is a representation of our funding sources. So if you were to think about this as a full dollar, if I'm rounding to 83 cents, so 82.9%, 83 cents for every dollar is paid for out of our property taxes. So the smaller piece of the pie is the federal and state aid that I went through, and then the larger piece of the pie is coming from our property taxes. So as much as IDEA was supposed to be fully funding special education back when it was first created in 1975, that is not the case and has not been the case. Any questions? That was a lot of information.
I do have one question, and I feel like you said something about the 2024, 2025, there was a number discrepancy. So basically, you might just be able to answer the question for me. So on the slides with the 22, 23, and then 23, 24, I was looking at the grade 4 group in 22, 23 was 41%. And then that same group, when they would become 5th graders the following year, were down at 20. So did we have a 21% decrease special education students?
I will look into that. So I pulled these two slides from the last presentation last spring, so I did not do that analysis, but I can certainly look into that.
I mean, I would love that. That would be great. But you know,
And our numbers do change.
Yep.
Students move, students may no longer be eligible based on their evaluation data. So there are a lot of variables, but I
Yeah.
can certainly look into.
because year to
that
year
drop.
here, it's pretty consistent, you know, 1, 2, 3% here and there, but the 21, I was like, whoa.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, these out-of-district placements, transportation, none of it's getting cheaper.
And trust me when I say we are submitting for every piece of special education aid that we can, and we will find room to submit for more where applicable.
I mean, the key is early intervention and MTSS to the greatest extent possible and trying to create in-district program.
So when it comes to contracted service providers, is there any way to cost share that with other districts or like have a special education kind of collaborative where instead of going through a contractor that's going to, you know, upprice it a significant amount, is there any way to work with other school districts to try to create like a special education collaborative in the local area where we share some of these rarer things?
Yeah, I've actually never been asked of that before. That's a wonderful question and idea. We have some contracted service providers who do work in some of our other surrounding school districts, so they try the best they can for scheduling purposes, but our contract stands alone with them. I don't know.
Yeah, and just to add to that, so I would sort of loosely define the special education programming that is at Pinkerton as somewhat of a collaborative, right? They have, several different, the ACT program, PASSES program, they have a HiSET program. They have an NCC program as well. And the surrounding town superintendents, we've had a lot of conversations with Pinkerton about the expansion of their special education services, especially given the fact the social studies building that they are just finishing and constructing really creates a lot of additional space for special education. The challenge there is staffing. Even the existing programs that Pinkerton has, they have had a very difficult time staffing those programs. And then when it comes to cost sharing on contracted employees, it's certainly been discussion. But again, the availability of contractors is pretty limited. And then I would also say, and this may sound a little arrogant, but we actually do better, I think, than some of the surrounding districts when it comes to securing personnel, securing contractors. It's still a major issue. But if you look at other surrounding districts in southern New Hampshire, they have some staffing issues that are more severe than the ones that we're facing.
So, for example, if we said we had a need for a half of a school psych, right? Is there a way that we could hire a full school psych and then other districts could utilize them and then pay the district back? Is that something that might be viable?
In theory, yeah, there's some complications with it in terms of, which district sort of owns that person. But again, a lot of it comes down to the availability of it. And a lot of the agencies that are employing school psychs and then having them contract know what school districts pay, and they will pay them more money. So when you are going to school to become a school psych, you can go to work directly for a school district, make X amount of dollars, or you can go work for an agency where you can potentially make considerably more money. We're fortunate here because we have an internship program for school psychs where we consistently get them. Generally, we have 2 a year. This year, we have 1. And I've had conversations with the school psych interns previously because I know our surrounding towns are looking for school psychs, and when I've approached them, they've already secured employment. They get scooped up pretty quickly.
I guess as far as aid goes, so we're getting somewhere around $314,000 of federal aid, and then we're getting around $523,000 from the state. and that's after the state has cut $250,000. Well, not cut, but effectively cost shared or downsized it into our district. And we basically just absorbed $250,000 into the current budget.
Yes.
Okay.
And
That's-
can I add just on that point, you know, you look at the referral numbers. Melissa, can you go to the next slide? The 24, 25. So look at preschool. 82% of the students in the program are identified. If we could just keep in mind that we don't even offer universal preschool. We only have our two preschool programs. 82% of them are identified. And we receive from the federal government for our preschool grant $8,600.
Total?
Total, right? And again, these are the students that we don't always know about. We try to work with early intervention services to identify the students in the pipeline, but oftentimes they show up at registration. And our obligation starts at 3 years old, but that process begins at around at 2.5. And so the difficulty of attempting to budget or forecast the kids that are going to show up on your door is very, very difficult. And the support that we get from the federal government is $8,600 for the whole program.
Do we,
I was going to say, Carl, the way that we absorb that additional $250,000, we set revenue later in the fall, and so when we set revenue, we have an idea of what we've submitted for reimbursement, and we have an idea what that rate is. So originally, I had budgeted $600,000 in revenue coming in, and I lowered that and adjusted it to $500,000, which means that the taxpayers have, it falls on the taxpayers
Yeah.
for the additional burden.
Yeah.
But the overall $250,000, I was not expecting.
So is that number for the coming school year, like, do we have a good idea what that looks like? Like, how locked in is what the state is going to give us for next year?
For this year,
For this, yes, for this, yeah.
I believe you had indicated, did you have a slide with that?
Yeah, we don't have anything though for, are you talking about? As
Yeah,
we continue
like
to roll
through this
forward?
year, like basically has the state guaranteed what's on that slide to us? Like the 523,000?
It's in writing. And it's all publicly posted.
So in theory, yeah, so in theory it's there.
In
Okay.
theory, yes, yes.
Okay.
To add to that, when we talk about future budgets, so in our conversations with the New Hampshire Education Department, they just recently submitted their biennium budget, so they do their budget every 2 years. They were told they have to submit a budget that is 4% under level funded. So that will obviously have impact on us. That impacts building aid, which we're on the list for, special education aid, which is we're having conversations about, and then all of the other operational pieces that the department has, which is, you know, not a huge portion of their budget. So we have to anticipate that the revenue that we are going to be receiving from the state and, quite frankly, the federal government is going to be significantly less moving forward.
So basically there's 831,000 we get every year right now after the $250,000 cut, and we can't guarantee on that going forward.
No, and you got to realize too that the 4% reduction below level funded for the department's budget to the legislature is the starting point, right? Like you know very well, you start and where you end up is always lower, or you can expect it to be lower. So they're starting at a 4% reduction, and we don't know where that will ultimately land, but it will have impact on future revenue.
and it looks like that cap increases year over year. So
hard
in
to
order to
get.
hit that ceiling to where we even qualify for state aid, it's more difficult to achieve every year.
It is.
Yes, yeah.
4% of level funded, not level service. So this is the amount of money we gave you last year. We're going to take 4% away from it. That's
And you are submitting that budget to the legislature for their review and potential additional cuts.
Do we know the average cost per student for out-of-district placement? Even if we don't know the exact number, do we know like a ballpark estimate?
I do not have that number off the top of my head, but I can get that for you.
Is it fair to question if in a perfect world, if we had the space to house these these students that are now out of district and the staff to provide the services, is it fair to say that we could provide that service in district and ultimately save money?
So we always strive for least restrictive environment. And of course, through an annual IEP meetings, the team is always looking at placement and whether that continues to be the least restrictive environment. I would never want to say that we could bring all of our students back in
Sure.
district. That would not be a fair statement. But could we strive to bring some of those back in? I'm sure that we could with the proper space, staffing, and funding.
And I'm not making any suggestions either way. I'm just asking questions.
No, absolutely.
And
It's an
I
important part of
feel
the
like
IEP
I've
process.
become an expert at getting that question. I don't always have an expert answer, but it always comes up in the context of the central school additions. And so I will say there's 4 components to answer that question in the affirmative to say, yes, we'll save money. So first, it starts with need. Like, what is the student population that warrants us being able to create number 2, which is a program. So you have to develop a program. So this year, knowing that we had a very small addition that passed, we instituted the RISE program to address some very specific needs that we had. So you have student need, you have programming, and then you need staff. Staff is the really tricky piece. Again, that's the reason why Pinkerton struggles to expand their programming. Hampstead is a desirable place for people to come. I think that we could possibly secure some of these staff members. It's a place that people want to work. And then number 4, which is really the big barrier, is space. We don't have the space. Like, we need another section of preschool. We absolutely do. To me, it seems like it's something that is mandatory. We don't have the space. So even with the space, we want to look at doing things that have universal return on investment. Universal kindergarten, absolutely. And then expanding preschool so that we can accommodate the needs of students with disabilities, but also bring in more typical peers as well.
Yeah, I am well aware of all those discussions. Given the fact that we could be on the hook for an extra $830,000 next year and the tax increases in town, I don't think it's fiscally responsible to move forward with any building projects, and we've had that discussion before. Long term, we will eventually have to figure that out, but this year is not the year to go forward with that.
I fully agree.
Go ahead.
Oh, Bill.
No, we spoke about Hampstead Academy a couple of months back at this point, and obviously that didn't work out. But have we gone out to do like an RFP on any other additional spaces that might be available in the community to pull in for early learning?
Not since last year. We had conversations about getting very creative about our utilization of space. And so we did engage with Hampstead Academy. That didn't pan out. We looked at the possibility of using St. Anne's. We looked at the possibility of even the office building that we're in could be utilized for preschool space. A lot of it came down to obviously the availability, but also the feasibility makes it a very, very challenging piece. And so if you are a student who's in preschool and you are a student with a disability and you're on an IEP, well, we are required to educate you. Even if we don't have space, we still are required. And what ends up happening is that we enter into tuition agreements with private preschools, other school districts. So the goal is, obviously, we want to try to educate these students in our own preschool program, but with 82% of the students identified and we really have the 2 classrooms, it's becoming more increasingly difficult to do that. So we would have to look for other options.
So I mean, over time, this is going to cost more money for the district. So I think we really need to prioritize trying to find a way to house this in district.
Correct. I think bringing in district or bringing into Pinkerton, like I think we need to get services closer. I understand that Pinkerton has a hard time staffing, but most people are. I think we still, like, Pinkerton needs to understand that we foot the bill for special education students that go to Pinkerton, correct? Like, it's not like they're absorbing it, like it is district specific. Like, if we have so many students, we pay for those students that go to Pinkerton. It's not a collective cost. And I think that's something that we have to keep raising with the local school districts to put pressure on Pinkerton, because they're gonna have to figure out and come through, because just in transportation, and like, not only is it the right thing to do, because the longer a special education kid is on the bus, the harder time they're gonna have in school. Like, they're our regional high school, they need to be able to come up with that.
And again, people, this kind of moral imperative that we've talked about, like, let's, obviously right now, the money piece of it is really important. But you know what is equally important? Is a high school kid with a pretty significant disability that wants to go to the same high school that every other kid in his town goes to. Like, that to me is, that's the banner, that's the flag that we wave. Because there are instances where, some of our kids that have some pretty intensive programs, and are housed in district, they cost a lot of money. And in some cases, they could cost more than some of the out of district. So it is like, we have to be looking at being able to manage our costs and being able to educate kids in their community school. That is a very important piece. I know when I talk to families, that's the piece that they really focus on, is that they want their kid to be like every other kid.
Any other questions for Melissa?
Thank you.
Great job, Melissa. Thank you very much.
Just that 20% decrease.
Yes, I will
Find
get you
out
an
where
answer.
those kids went.
Absolutely.
Because I don't think they didn't,
we
I don't
had-
think they became unspecial education overnight.
We had that question last year, and we figured it out, but I don't remember what it was.
And I know in part, so
Okay.
that's a pretty big discrepancy. There's definitely something going on with the numbers, but we've had a situation where last year, for the last school year, we had a number of fourth graders come back from a local school, and then that 4 into 5, like, every year can be different. You have some people who are like, our kid's gone to private school or a charter school, and we want them to come back for middle school, or vice versa, where they say, we've had a great elementary school experience, but we're going to send them to a private or school for middle school. So there is some variation there, but that's
Yeah,
off.
that's a bit- that's a
That's
big-
just off too much. So we'll make that correction, get that information.
Yes, absolutely. I'll get that answer out there. Thank you.
Thank you, Melissa. Very thorough. Great discussion by the board. Okay. Moving on to our proposed 2025-2026 Hampstead School District budget with Bob Thompson.
All right. At the last meeting, we presented the administration's annual proposed operating budget. We received a great deal of feedback. And so tonight, what we're going to do is present draft 2, so to speak, which does have some adjustments. I was also tasked with taking a look at what was presented last week and then making some reductions, some proposed reductions for the board's consideration, and I've done that. So I would like to start with, I'm going to turn it over to Jeff, who's going to walk you through draft 2, and then the other important number tonight is our default.
And Nicole, could you go back to the budget itself? I think it's separate. Nope. Not that one. Yes, that must be it right there. Perfect.
There we go.
Okay. So we presented to the board what I'll call draft one, which was last time we were here. I mentioned that during that budget presentation, we go through an exercise around this time to confirm and shore up any numbers that are outstanding, and those numbers that have been finalized. So we received our tuition Pinkerton increase percentage. For regular tuition, it's 5.63%. That results in a savings of $21,591. We were able to also true up our special education rates, which resulted in a savings of $54,658, bringing our total proposed draft 2 budget to $38,525,495. This is down from the original budget of $38,601,000. So really the only changes that we see here with draft 2 are to reflect those actual estimates that we've received, and there may be some additional exercises the board may engage in, and Bob can speak to that momentarily. I provided, if you wanted to scroll down, Nicole, to the next page, there's a copy of the budget drivers, which hasn't changed much, and a copy of the proposed budget by function, well, by object code, to give you an idea as to where some of the areas of budget reduction and budget increase are. And if you look at the middle column on the spreadsheet, it is captioned difference, and you'll see that under the expense side, our budget differences are listed from high to low. So tuitions are up 543,000, transportation's up 416,000, repair and maintenance 383,000, travel workshops 167,000. So we went over these all at the last meeting, with the exception that the tuition's probably a little bit lower on this particular draft of the budget. So next, I'd like to talk about the default budget, and then I can address any questions that you have. So if you wouldn't mind, Nicole. Thank you. So the first thing that we start off with the default budget is the default budget statute, which is New Hampshire RSA 4013, subsection 9B, which defines the default budget. I've included this in the packet because this is the basis by which we assemble the default budget. The best way to describe the default budget is it is the prior year appropriations, so whatever our budget was last year, minus any one-time or extraordinary items, and increased by certain factors, such as items that might be legally required, or items that we, for example, a collective bargaining agreement we had previously voted on, voters had previously voted on and authorized. So that is the budget statute itself. Nicole, I'll ask you to move on. So if the way the default budget is put together is we simply look at last year's appropriations in total. It doesn't really matter where they are necessarily. We make adjustments, and that gets rolled forward. And I'll stop here, Nicole. So the form associated with the calculation salad amendment include the following. So the appropriations contained in the previous year's operating budget, which we talked about, reductions and increases to the previous year's operating budget, including the identification of specific items that constitute a change by account code and the reasons for each change, one-time expenditures, and reductions for eliminated positions and benefit expenditures as defined under paragraph 9B. So now we can proceed. So we're going to first look at our our current year budget. The current year budget, voted budget, is $38,938,889, of which we will reduce that budget by $1,298,543, giving us our fiscal year 26 default budget of $37,640,346. The current draft 2 proposed budget is $38,525,495. Although that is under the current year voted budget, the delta between the default budget and the proposed budget is $885,149. So I'm going to go through just a real brief overview to help understand. If you wanted to scroll down, Nicole, thank you. Some of these by high-level categories. So first, we have about $185,000 as an addition to the current year appropriations for the HAS collective bargaining agreement, which was voted March 2023, warrant article number 5. We have some increases in the special and regular transportation, both of which are legally required. We have special tuition increases of $460,687. We have health insurance increases of $308,458. That is something we're contractually locked into as well through the CBAs and through a number of employment agreements. We have workers' compensation increase, which we're legally required to carry, of $4,388. We have a network infrastructure. I don't know if you recall, voted. It was a one-time item. It wasn't part of a typical replacement cycle. It was just a very large project that had to happen, which I'm attributing $82,490 to that project. So that comes out of the budget. We have a capital reserve warrant article, March 2024. That was article number 3 for $1 million. That was a one-time item, so that gets removed from the budget, or from the default budget. And we had the infill classroom warrant, which was March 2024, article number 4, $1,558,950, which also comes out of the default budget. So I will ask Nicole to scroll down just a bit. This is the level of detail. It's not extraordinarily readable or digestible on the screen, but you can see line by line function object code where those changes are, starting with the 2025 budget numbers, with reductions or increases, and with reductions for one-time appropriations, giving us the total 2026 default budget. This is by function object code with the reason for any change, any addition or subtraction from the budget given. So you can go through, it's about, I think, 6 pages, maybe 5 pages from here. So the detail is there. It's available on the website as well. The default budget will be voted on. This is your budget, the school board's budget. This will be voted on at some point by the school board. I would not recommend doing so at this point. There are a number of things that can still impact the default budget. And so while I'm pretty comfortable with the number that we have now, any certain changes that the board may agree upon may have an impact on the default budget itself. So the detail is there. A lot of our lines really are just, they don't have any reason or cause to touch the appropriation, the previous year appropriation. So that's that.
So the quick version is, if the budget gets voted down this year, we'd have to cut $880,000.
From the current draft 2 budget.
That does not include any of the
The stuff
exercise
we're
that
gonna
we're
talk about
about to
today.
engage
Yeah.
in.
Okay.
So we got to keep that in mind.
And the way that it works is if our operating budget fails and the default budget then becomes the budget, I would bring, and really, you're really getting a bottom line budget at that point, because there's not a lot of integrity to the actual lines where the things were in the current budget versus where we need them next year. So I'm going to come back to the board if the default budget were to be our operating budget and say, hey, here's what was voted in total, and here's what I would propose for a reorganization of that budget. And that would be a one-time type of election by the board. You can make budget transfers. As you know, I've come to you with budget transfers for policy, but when we look at that budget, when we take all of that money and then allocate it to where we need it, this board would approve that budget.
So just quickly, where we lost $253,000 in state aid, we have to pay $308,000 more in health insurance, and we have to pay $380,000 more in transportation, and all of the 3 of those are locked in. So that's basically $1 million that increase that we didn't have any say in.
Right, and unlike the
That's correct.
state, the towns don't have the ability to generate revenue really outside of property taxes. And I believe the state is looking to, has proposals that will decrease their existing revenue streams, which means that,
Yeah, we're not.
yeah, which means that we will end up having to pick that up, and we don't have an ability to generate revenue the way that the state does, unfortunately.
Just out of curiosity, why would you recommend not approving the default budget? And I'm just curious. This is my first rodeo.
So yeah, and this is an interesting one. You can approve the default budget as much as you want. You could approve it tonight if you wanted, and that's fine. It's nice to have sort of an official default budget in the works, and it's something that I will take a look at between any action that the board takes tonight and our next meeting to come up with that final number. But you could certainly even approve it tonight, and that would be the number. And if there are no changes, then we're all set.
But approving it tonight would be based on the premise that the board is not going to take any action on these proposed cuts, right? Because even with, there's obviously a ripple effect. If the board approves $100,000 in cuts, Jeff has to go through and see does that cut land in the default, or is it taken out? And sitting with Jeff over the last week to have him go through and review with me this default process and looking at every item, it is a major undertaking.
And then just a follow-up to that. So when we get the warrant article, it goes out. If for whatever reason it does not pass and we end up with the default budget, Jeff has to come back to the board and say, this is your pot of money. How do you want to reorganize it? Just to be clear with everybody listening, like that could result in significantly deep cuts.
Correct.
Which could include personnel cuts.
Exactly.
So it's important that we get it right.
885,000, having not gone through this exercise that we're about to go through would absolutely mean staff cuts.
And you have to realize, like the board, you're approving that bottom number, and all of the items that are in the various account lines, they're really a forecast and a prediction. And I know that sounds a little scary, but tomorrow, a student with a $300,000 out-of-district cost could move into the district, and well, I don't want to say tomorrow, but after the budget is approved, right? We have to absorb that cost. It happens often, right? As we get closer to the new fiscal year, even before the fiscal year starts on July 1, the needs we have today are not the needs we're going to have when the new fiscal year starts. And I would love to live in a world where we had less need, but that does not happen. And so yes, a default budget has a bigger impact than really what you see right now.
If somebody moves into town like that, is there any emergency aid or anything that can be picked up, like through
There's
the state or federal government?
special education aid, which Melissa just presented.
Okay.
So,
So
I'm being
So
slightly
basically,
facetious, no.
the piece of the pie that is shrinking is what would help with that, which means
Yeah.
it's going to help.
But
you.
that's also why you don't want to pay like a $100,000 salary out of a grant.
That's
long-term.
exactly what I was about to say, is that trying to free up as much money in IDEA, because that really is what IDEA is for those unanticipated costs. You put them there, they reside there for a certain amount of time, and then they get put into the operating budget. So having money in IDEA is a helpful way to create that cushion.
Okay. All right.
So I'm delighted that Bob is still in good spirit about this, because I've made him sit down with me and go through to make sure I'm not missing anything in the budget, pages and pages of expenditures, equipment, different things, just to make 100% sure that I'm looking at the budget correctly, he's looking at the budget correctly, and we're able to make the best proposal to the board.
And there are some school districts that do have special education trust, but a priority of the board previously, and I believe moving forward, has been on capital reserve. We desperately need an addition, which will have a lot of benefit to special education. But I think it's, when we look at a medium to long-term goal, looking at developing a special education trust where every year, just like we do the capital reserve, we can put money in the event of some catastrophic expense, would certainly be prudent. I think this year, with the feedback that I know the board has gotten and I've gotten as well, it does not seem like this is the appropriate time to be able to go to taxpayers and ask for that addition.
Would agree. I like the thought of it, but I don't know if this year is the year.
Yeah, well, especially with the cost uncertainty where we don't know how much special education aid or what aid we're going to be getting. But, all right.
Right. We want to move forward?
Yeah, so part two of our budget conversation, I was tasked by the board on the November 12th school board meeting, after the presentation of the proposed operating budget, to create some different scenarios. So the directive that I received from the board was they wanted 3 scenarios. One was $100,000 worth of proposed cuts, $200,000 worth of proposed cuts, and then $300,000 of proposed cuts. I'm let the board know today that I didn't follow directions. And so what I'm doing is I've actually, instead of 3 separate scenarios, I've actually given the board 6. And they range with scenario number 1 from $174,753, all the way up to $633,138. And let me explain why. It's very simple. When we began first looking at the operating budget, we realized that being able, I think, to get to 100 seems like it would be a task that was relatively easy, as we just waited for some new numbers to come in. And then the town reassessments came out. And as a result of that, and the disproportionate share that our residential, residents are paying versus our commercial properties, I know the board, you've communicated to me individually that you've gotten a lot of feedback from citizens. I know I have as well. I've had a lot of really great conversations about revenue, the issues that we talked about with during the student services presentation. So I took that as a need for us to kind of reevaluate the 100, 200, 300,000. So this is what I present to you. So I'm going to start with scenario number one. So this scenario number one would be 174,753, and I'm not going to go through all of these. So please feel free to stop, ask as many questions as you like. 174,753. Mrs. Tomaselli has secured hard numbers on two different math curriculum programs. Now, the math curriculum is still in pilot phase, so they haven't selected a program, but we did get hard numbers, and we did scale back based upon feedback from the board from a 6-year agreement to a 3-year agreement. That saves, that would result in us being able to remove $77,753 from the budget. We had discussed special education bus. We continue to see our special education costs, transportation costs increase. However, there are a lot of moving pieces, as the board is aware, with it's not just securing a bus, it's securing drivers. There are a number of factors involved here. This is something that I feel very passionate about, and I know that Mrs. McDonald shares that passion, because we absolutely can recoup our cost. This is a good long-term investment. This year's just not the year to do it. Because in order to reap that return on investment, there needs to be an upfront cost. I don't think there's an appetite for that. So this is scenario number one.
Can I ask a question on the math curriculum?
Yes.
When you say it's saves money, if we do a 6-year versus a 3-year, how much more or less per year is the 6-year versus the 3-year? I would assume that the 6-year would be cheaper per year.
Yeah, I'll defer the answer to that to Mrs. Tomaselli.
Hi, Carl. That's a great question. So initially, I set out with quotes for 1, 3, and 6 years. And initially, my proposal was for 6 years, and we're piloting between 3 different companies. So the 6-year quote for one of the companies is down to around $21 per student, whereas the 3-year is about $23 per student. That doesn't include.
What were the numbers again?
$21.39
Okay.
per student for 6 years, versus $22.95. So I would just say $23 per student for 3 years. However, that number is not all encompassing for any manipulatives, any professional learning, shipping, teacher manuals. So those are separate line items in the math budget.
And I know this is very vague, but in your experience, how much does the cost jump over the course of 3 years? In other words,
Yeah, it's really hard to predict. Anywhere from, well, and we don't typically buy curriculum year to year.
Yeah.
So it's been, 3 years since I've looked at ELA costs.
so
It's very,
yeah.
that I would feel uncomfortable giving you a hard
Okay.
number. I would say somewhere between 5 and 7%.
Okay. So yeah, right now it's $1.50 difference, but in 3 years it won't be $1.50. It's going to be even more than that, because when we go to renew.
It's true. The thing I would consider, though, is if we were to do a 3-year with either one of these companies, we could renew again in 3 years and not maybe not need as much professional development or any if our staff doesn't completely turn over, just do onesie twosies, and we won't need manipulative kits or teacher manuals. So at that point, we will just be buying student licenses.
In some circumstances, in some industries, once they get you locked in for 3 years, they then jump up the price extremely. Is
That's
that
the
common
risk.
in education?
I think certain companies are able to do that because the word gets out that their product is excellent, and it kind of catches on, and we see prices increase. But I do think with the programs we're looking at, all of our middle school math teachers are very interested in owning a little bit more of the curriculum writing around their disciplines. And so I would love to be at a place where we're less reliant on digital work texts. In K-5, that's nearly impossible because of their generalist roles, or in K-4 especially. Here we have the luxury of 5th grade. It could either go as a K-5, which is standards aligned, or write our curriculum in 5th grade. But our 6th through 8th grade teachers and our algebra teacher is really well positioned to be able to pull together an aligned curriculum.
And then after 3 years, we could do a longer contract to try to save money if we liked it?
Yeah, I think when the economy is really favorable, you should try to lock in longer terms for products that you know you're going to stick with.
Okay.
So I do think where these are both newer products, a 3-year, I would feel very comfortable with a 3-year agreement. And then we'll be in a very different situation, I think, in 3 years.
Nicole, can you
Hopefully.
quickly, something that you brought to my attention this week, there is a little bit of an issue with the alignment of the language arts curriculum purchase. Do you want
The
to
cycle.
just mention that?
Yes, so what I would really like to avoid is I don't want to be in a situation where we're having to have ELA licensing of Wonders and HMH expiring at the same time as our math curriculum. So we purposely offset these a few years ago. We bought a 1-year math license for this year so that we would have time to pilot and kind of do our due diligence finding a good product. If we do a 3-year, I would redesign our curriculum cycle. I would really take a closer look at our curriculum cycle. I don't want to kick the can and end up with a big problem in 3 years.
And so that could look like, a 1-year extension agreement
Right.
for either math or language arts, or even next year when we're planning the budget, if we know the product is high quality and we want to move forward with it, to do the extension next year as well. But if we leave math curriculum alone, we're going to bump into this issue where we could come forward. And again, it's a long-term problem, but we'd be looking at a pretty significant increase in curriculum, and we want to avoid that to the greatest extent that is possible.
Yeah, I do think English language arts curriculum is our most expensive curriculum purchase that we'll have to make. So you definitely don't want that to stack up with any other discipline.
I definitely feel more comfortable on the idea of doing 3 years, but I think something to be aware is if you think about it at your job, if you're using a computer system or you're learning something, and then 3 years later your job decides to overhaul it and use a completely new computer system, and all the work and the effort you have to put in is going to be frustrating, and that's something that I think has to be accounted for when deciding whether to keep the system or not. So.
Any other questions on math or the special education transportation? Thank you, Nicole. So just moving on to scenario 2, and just in the interest of time, I'm not going to go over all of these items. And I also want to point out, in a $38 million budget, when we're talking $1,000 is a lot of money, please don't get me wrong, but in the context of $38 million budget, it is a very, very small percentage. So a lot of these $1,000 items, they're on the list. The board has received information about them, so I'm just going to entertain questions. I do want to mention a couple of these, though. So discretionary staff stipends, I'm going to look to have a $7,000 reduction. That's based upon an analysis that we've done of several of the stipends. Tonight, I don't think it would be prudent for us to identify where those are, because again, all of this money exists in an account line, and we do have a general sense, but our needs change over the course of a year. So, just know this round 2, we would be looking at $7,000, and there's some additional money in a future scenario. And then jumping down to the staff T-shirts and uniforms has been an issue of conversation, and the board recognizes how important morale is in being able to support staff, but also, you know, this is an item that we'd look to do some fundraising on. And I didn't take out the entire amount. I did take out a good portion of it. There is still some money in there that we'd likely use to support maybe something for the technology department. And then the other one that there were some questions on is school lunch balance support. So at the end of the school year, we traditionally land with a deficit, and despite our best efforts to collect money from families, we have a number of families who don't pay. And many of them, it's the result of they don't qualify for free and reduced lunch, but they can't afford to pay their lunch balance. So we write off, last year we wrote off approximately $9,000. The thought this year was, let's get ahead of that. We know that we are going to have this expense, so rather than just taking it out of unreserved funds at the end of the year, let's budget for it. So just know, reducing it, we're still going to have an expense, but we would look to do what we've done before, which is to take it out of unreserved fund balance. So with that said, any questions about scenario 2?
Well, I'm not really sure why you kept anything in, you know, apparel, because I think people push their badges, but, you know how I feel about that.
Yes.
I know you don't want to discuss the discretionary stipend thing, but I would just caution on that, on the what I'm reading here, of the potential of where it could come from. I would caution on that. I'm trying not to say too much.
And you know, we can have the conversation. I said it wasn't prudent for us to have the conversation, but that doesn't mean we can't. And if you want some specifics, I can certainly give them to you.
I just think in that particular case, you won't get someone to do that job.
I
I think it's too big of a cut. I just, for that.
I think,
You've had it for X amount of years that way, it's
Yep.
the way it's been.
And I think I was the one that kind of squawked about this the most. So I just want to be clear that I was not necessarily saying we should cut what it is, because I think once you've kind of opened Pandora's box, like, you're there, right? And you need to make sure that you have somebody to do that job. What I really wanted information on is how are we coming to that number? So am I going to see that number increasing every year, or is that the number?
Yeah.
That's more or less was my.
And I think both of your comments sort of illustrate my point, which is, like, a lot can happen between now and the time that we need to, you know, the start of our new fiscal year. And so, you know, we haven't completed an analysis. We know that needs will change. So to commit that $7,000 to one specific position or a handful of positions is not, we want the flexibility to be able to go into the winter or the spring and be able to have more informed decisions about how we will expend that pool of money, because quite frankly, that $7,000 is still a very, very small overall amount when you look at the entirety of the amount of money that we're paying in stipends. So.
Yeah, and for me, that's individually when you look at the stipends, like, I understand why they're there, but when you're doing $300,000 worth of stipends, which is 1% of the budget, that's hefty. And I trust you as the superintendent to make the decisions and to put stuff in place. And I know that is somewhat comparable to surrounding districts, but it feels high to me. So.
Yeah, I'm gonna put it out there to caution that, because I think that you will get people to not want to do that, and it will cause you a big problem. And I don't know if that big problem is worth that. So I'm putting that out there.
For Summer Learning Academy, I just see that listed here for $5,000. As a big fan of the program, whose kids attended the program, I definitely don't want to see that go away. So just to clarify, that would be a potential reduction in what we offer for Summer Learning Academy, but not doing away with the program, correct?
Correct, and I will answer this one for Nicole because I do want to brag a little bit. You know, this design of Summer Learning Academy, you know, was essentially, you know, when we were coming back from COVID, the model that Mrs. Tomaselli and our team came up with was replicated in multiple districts. She's presented at multiple conferences. It was really hailed as a model, an outstanding model. It was funded entirely with the ESSER. It had no impact on the operating budget. Then we saw the expiration of ESSER, and we didn't want to fall off a financial cliff. We assumed we would roll all of it into the operating budget and then have to make some hard decisions. And no, again, Mrs. Tomaselli found another grant to be able to put it in. So I would, you know, I'm not putting any pressure on Nicole, but like we're obviously going to look for, I know, when you say that, you put pressure on people. You know, we would look for some grant funding, especially when we're talking about $5,000. It's not out of the realm of impossible to find a grant for around that dollar amount. But then also there's a component of Summer Learning Academy with Camp Invention. A lot of school districts are doing Camp Invention. That's not our homegrown, but we offer, it is an offering. And it's really, some districts, parents pay all of it. Some of districts, it's subsidized by the school district, so they offer a very low cost. And then in our case, we've offered it. And I think moving towards, at a minimum, a subsidized model, if not parents are going to pay. And granted, we have scholarships, so if you qualify for free and reduced lunch, or there's a whisper that, look, I really can't afford it, we're gonna help you out, we're gonna take care of that. So this $5,000 cut, I believe will be able to allow us to maintain the same level of programming. We're gonna have to potentially grant fund it or pass off some of the cost.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a great program, so I would like to see it continue, but like you said, it was something that we were able to offer free of charge during COVID, or because of COVID. And it's just, I just don't think that that's something that it being free to all is sustainable for the district. I know that my child, prior to COVID, did Camp Invention and we paid the full thing. So it was those types of programs were always parent pay. Again, scholarships available if people need them. I think that's great. But I do think that while we should keep this going, we need to switch the model back, unfortunately.
And
And if she can find grants, then great. Then that's even better. But
and a gradual approach might be the way to go. It's and again, a lot of those pieces come together not now; they end up coming together in the spring. So, any other questions on scenario 2? So again, scenario 2 includes all of scenario 1, and then these additional items. Scenario 3, which is a total of $362,000 of a reduction to the proposed operating budget, includes $150,000 for the HCS septic tank replacement. So I've had conversations with Mr. Mackey and Mr. Dowd, and this is something that we've had routine inspections. It is difficult to inspect a septic tank because it's underground, but signs of catastrophic failure are not there. There have been some indications of some leaking at times, but although it is at end of life, and it is certainly something that we need to look to replace, when I met with Mr. Mackey, he had indicated that he was comfortable being able to push this item out for a year. It's also important to note that the Capital Reserve Fund, we could fund a septic tank out of Capital Reserve. I know we primarily look at that money for a school addition, but it is an allowable expense, even though there's a process involved in getting there. I also want to point out that we have 2 really big capital projects currently in. One is the septic tank, and then the second one is the underground oil tank. And so we're still going to move forward with the I think it's around $230,000 oil tank replacement So the bigger capital expense in facilities will maintain that, and we'll take the 150 out.
And the septic tank would be approximately, and it's a very ballpark, is around 300,000. I think that's what Jeff said. Yeah. Okay.
That might be the amount, but it could be in excess of 500,000.
Okay. So basically, if we did a $150,000 cap reserve and we did $150,000 in the budget, we would
Cobble it together.
maybe, if everything breaks right, that we could replace it.
That's right.
Okay.
But in any event, we wouldn't, if we were to have a catastrophic failure, the 150,000 that we are currently proposing in the budget to be removed from the budget, that wouldn't be enough to get it done on its own,
Yeah, we'd have to pull from the current cap reserve, which,
no matter what.
yeah.
I do have concerns with this. On the one hand, if it does fail, we end up pulling from capital reserve to try to fix it. On the other hand, it is a very large expense. As Bob mentioned, we have another project going on, another need going on with the oil tank. So at this point, if the experts say there's no catastrophic signs of failure, I guess I would be, considering the projects that we have going on, I would be open to removing it, but I don't know how the other board members feel.
Yeah, I know I feel the same. I feel like if Jeff's got a pretty good handle on that stuff, and I feel like if he thought, like, knew this has to happen, like, immediately, then I would believe him. You know, so
I
if he
agree.
says that he thinks that that we're okay, then I think we're okay. I gotta go with his, his recommendation on that.
I would
I
agree.
don't wanna keep pushing maintenance things off. I think, like, unfortunately, facilities seems to be the one that ends up getting that. They also have some of the bigger ticket items,
Right.
unfortunately. So we just need to make sure we're keeping an eye on it, which I think everybody is.
Yeah, and the district has a very long-standing history of not deferring maintenance. Other school districts have long laundry lists of deferred maintenance, constantly playing catch-up, and Hampstead does not have a history of that. So these things, you know, if Jeff is saying that we can defer it, and I don't doubt that. Now, that's not to say that, you know, things happen, but we have a little bit of, of cushion with the capital reserve. The other piece too is that, you know, the $230,000 that is designated for the oil tank, should there be failure, could be used to fund the septic tank. Again,
And then do
we're
the
really
oil
just
tank the next
voting
year.
on the bottom line. Now, the part of the issue with that is, once the operating budget is approved, Jeff's going to really get to work on securing, you know, bids and getting everything lined up. So if on June 30th the septic tank fails, we would have already been committed to the $230 for the underground oil tank. But like with any of these items, you know, it's the bottom line, and then there can be further conversation about how we're going to, you know, look to allocate that when the new fiscal year starts.
Yeah, a month ago, I was not comfortable with waiting on the septic tank, but the conversation about having a big ticket item with the oil this year, but I really think we have to do the septic next year, because
I would agree.
it's one of those things, if we do have a catastrophic failure, it's not gonna be 300,000, it's gonna be 500,000, because we're gonna have to do it right away.
Right.
Any other scenario 3 questions?
I'm just concerned that if we kick it too far down, the price goes up. I mean, I don't know if it's prudent to say, okay, we're gonna take the 150 out of the budget, but we're gonna kick, you know, 25,000 into capital reserve just in case. So if it does go off, we don't deplete that.
Yeah, for me, it's.
Just
yeah.
the thought.
For me, my thought process is we do 150, 200,000 for capital reserve, specifically to pay for half of it this year and half next year. To put into cap reserve so we can cover it next year.
Oh, I understand.
Or
what you're
you're saying take it out of cap reserve right now?
No,
No, I think he's
no,
saying keep it in the
no. What
budget.
I'm saying is instead of taking, take the 150 out of the budget,
Yeah.
right? But put a portion of that in capital reserve,
Correct, yes.
just in case an emergency
Yes.
happens, so that we
I-
don't
yes.
pull the entire 150 or whatever it might cost. for you.
Correct, yeah.
So we know what it's gonna
I'm on the
cost.
same page as what you're saying, yes.
Yep.
Yep,
So basically kick the can down the road, but create a contingency plan.
correct, yep.
Is what I'm saying.
All right, so moving on to scenario 4. So scenario 4 is $403,138 of a reduction to the operating budget. So that includes all of scenario 3. And then this is a long laundry list of much smaller ticketed items. So I would only just ask if, and we're also getting into a scenario that starts to cause some discomfort for me. So unless there's specific questions, I do want to point out for a number of these, like when we talk about like a field trip funding reduction, we're not talking about cutting out field trips. What we're talking about is having them being parent funded. And again, we have parents that are unable to fund it. We also want to encourage participation by keeping the number low. So some of these additions this year were like subsidizing field trips. So we're pulling back on that. It doesn't mean these great experiences go away. They're just not funded through our operating budget.
Yeah, I think I'm specifically on this one. What is the experience, the HCS experiential learning opportunities? Those are field trips as well that could be parent funded. Is that what we're?
Yeah, we'll have Dr. Cheney talk about that.
So those are not only field trips, but they could be bringing things on site. So for example, we have some guest speakers that may come on site, or the Museum of Science may offer some opportunities. So opportunities for our students to engage with learning, but on site. Like our soil tent is a great example. That's not one of the things that's a fee, but it would be something similar.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. So I think I noted in the past, some of these field trips and experiences, whatever, were actually funded by like PTSA, Fathers Club, things like that. Not that we should necessarily rely on that. I don't know that PTSA is in the position to do that right now. I think that they need some more support to be able to get their funds back up and do that. But that was something that we did. I can't tell you how many times people came to the board and asked for $1,000 for this and $1,000 for that. So I think that you might be able to find places that would help with that.
Yeah, no, I would agree.
So, good.
And, you know, we have the Hampstead Education
Right.
Association, they have grants. I just want to be clear that when a teacher comes forward with this really great idea of something they want to do, it's not, well, we don't have money for that. It is, all right, it's not in the operating budget, so we're going to have to get really creative. Then, Nicole works with them, we find a grant, we, turn to some of the civic organizations, like we make it happen. And we'll continue to make it happen.
Okay, yeah, I just want to clarify. I mean, you did just say, it's not going to cut these things, but I just want to, some of these things I think are important to.
So for me on this, we set, the board goals. We talked about having a dynamic learning experience. We talked about outdoor classrooms. And the idea that we are charging our teachers with coming up with these things. This gives the flexibility to our teachers. And it's 1/10 of 1% of the budget would be is this grouping. It's $40,000. And it allows the flexibility to not have to go to the PTA, to not be able to do these things. So this is where I kind of get reticent on paring back too much when you can't give the mandate and then not give the money. And then you're putting the burden more on teachers when it comes to that, because they're probably just going to take it out of their own pockets to do it.
I don't know if I agree with that. I mean, I can only go by my experience. Things weren't free until COVID. I mean, before that, any field trip that my children went on or any other child went on, it might have cost like $10 or $15
I would agree
for them
with
to
that.
go. So it's not like we're not talking like the DC trip is like $1,000, so that's like, I don't even know how anyone's doing that, but, you know, these trips are usually like, typically like we're talking $10. We're not talking, you know. big
Yeah,
dollars.
most of this is not field trips though. There's one, maybe two things that are field trips. This is discretionary funds, which is, you put a whole bunch of educators in a room, you say, come up with something awesome. Like, have the ability to think about cool things to come up with, and then have the money to back it. And they may not use it over the course of the year, and it may come back to us. But having that opportunity and having that leeway, I think, is important to them.
But how is that different from instructional supply fund? I guess that's kind of where I get stuck. So we have these discretionary funds.
Yes,
but
the
then we-
825 and the science ones.
Yeah, but then we also have supplies.
So, well, the supplies are out of the HMS line as far as I can see here. So I'm
Yeah.
sorry, I can't speak to that. But on my supply line, that would be things like, under social studies, for example, would be our Scholastic News or our Time for Kids that we use as part of our curriculum. The discretionary funds are things like my, what are those called? Cuisinart rods. I need another set of those because my enrollment has gone up. Or I'd really like to buy a magnetic set so I can show that up on my whiteboard. So things that might not be included with our regular programming, but that we need for supplemental materials. The math here I've taken out because of the new math program. And the science is the consumables for all of their science experiments. So we use a program called Mystery Science, but we do need to supplement it with materials to complete those experiments. Does
On
that make
case,
sense?
I hear what you're saying. I thought you were still on field trips.
No, I'm just
So
saying,
discre- no,
I'm saying as a block,
discretionary-
yeah.
No,
yeah.
discretionary, like, obviously, we wouldn't want staff members to go into their pockets to buy those
Exactly.
Yeah.
extra pieces,
That
right?
was my
So-
concern.
so
And not for,
me, that
yeah.
would be a different,
Yeah.
kind of
And-
separate.
And not for 1/10 of 1% of the budget. Like, this is not going to change the tax rate.
Yeah, so like, I think what I'm trying to figure out is there a way to, and I, without looking at every page of this year's budget, like how much of the supply budget has been spent or encumbered, and the same for this discretionary funding? Can it not just be one lump sum of supply funds that the principal then has the autonomy to utilize that for? Maybe this year we need a little bit more on the math side. Maybe this year we need a little bit more on the English side. I find that if you do it out by department, you pigeonhole yourself in there. It's not like it's a high school where we have these giant departments. I mean, these are small schools.
Well, I do think that for transparency purposes, it's good for the board and our public to be able to see when it comes to science, what are we spending on materials? But your point is a good one because, you know, the principal does have that autonomy when, you know, they are reviewing their account lines and realize, oh, our science money has run out. Well, but I have money in my general supplies, or I have money here. Like, their ability to be able to move money around, it exists. And
So, yeah.
so there's no, you know, no need to go without. And I think, you know, just to speak to the larger thing, if you want to make cuts and the directive is don't touch staff, we got to touch supplies. You know, like it is. I don't have anything. We don't have anything else to look at.
Well, right,
you
you
know?
also have a note here to, you know, that, you know, like the math discretionary fund, for example, isn't needed because of the math materials in the new curriculum.
But that's where it doesn't make sense to me, because that's, if you're saying discretionary supplemental, that's not supplemental. The math curriculum materials, that's not supplemental,
Well, they were saying.
that's the core.
Well, no, but they were saying if you need more of them or you need different sort of manipulatives or something else. Like
Above and beyond what they're going to give you with your math curriculum.
And Dr. Shane, can you just talk a little bit about, so if you're a classroom teacher, what,
I remember those days.
yeah, I know. What type of discretionary funds do you have if we look across the subject areas? And then how are, to Dr. Poor's point, how are
Yeah.
we defining that?
Sure. So I have encumbered a little bit of money in each of the content areas. So, well, let me try again. In English and math, and then a general supply line. Science as well for those experiments, but it's less discretionary and more science replenishment for their kits. In English and math, like I said, it would be things like, you know what, this year we're going to spend some extra time with some picture books, and so I need to add to my picture book collection. Or this group of readers tends to be, they're a little more precocious, so I need to buy some chapter books earlier at first grade that I might not have in my classroom library. Or simply, my books are wearing out and I need to purchase some additional. Same thing with the math numbers. I'm talking about these magnetic, like, oh my gosh, what's the word I'm looking for? The by tens rods that they have, and the teachers were very excited about those because it was a really nice visual way to show that. Back in the old days when we did like projectors, tens frames, thank you, Nicole. Or where we have our dot cameras, they might have a manipulative that they put under there to project up. Under the general supply line, I think it's around $50 that I've budgeted per teacher, and they might buy things like borders for their bulletin boards, or they might buy some nameplates that fit their theme for the year. If their theme were flamingos, for example, in their classroom, they may use that to fit their theme for the year.
And so, Dr. Cheney, when you're looking at your overall expense budget, which is in the $300,000 range, why the $1,500 in science specifically?
So that is about a third of what we had budgeted previously, and it's just as Dr. Poor said, I took a look at what we had spent historically over the last couple of years and felt comfortable reducing it by that much.
Okay. So you're looking at actual expense?
Correct.
Okay.
In the science line
So-
specifically, just to be clear.
That's the question.
Yes.
Yeah, and I would also like to just say that when we started the conversation about scenario 4, I did say that this is where we start to get uncomfortable, right? So I'm just asking the questions that I'm not advocating for us to make these cuts.
Yeah, for me, it's like, I wouldn't want to do any specific one. I think if we're going to touch this at all, we should pick a dollar amount to reduce it and then let them figure it out. So if we're not going to, if it's 40,000, we decide it's 30,000 or whatever, but.
I think that's appropriate for like the discretionary things, but I think a couple of these lines we can look at. So
I think Bob's put a lot of effort into the budget and he's prioritized, and I think if we want to do that, we should just reduce it by a flat dollar amount and let him make the decisions.
And it may be helpful to go through the other scenarios first before we, once there's other questions for scenario 4.
I did have other questions.
One thing that's not on this list that popped into my head, and you can let me know whether that was already gotten rid of, the replacement cycle for the polished concrete floors for like the way those locker rooms.
Yeah, we kept that in because we were asking Mr. Mackey to remove the septic at 150.
Okay.
So, and again, it was pointed out last year when we cut the 100,000, he was like, I think around 30% of the cuts. His one department, which doesn't represent 30% of our budget, he took a hit, and I know he feels pretty passionate about getting those done because of the maintenance costs. So that is still in the budget.
Okay, just wanted to clarify.
Yep.
Thanks.
Dr. Poirier.
I just had two questions. So obviously safety is important. So the situation with the radios, again, it's only $1,000, but like what is the background on that again? Without, I know he's not here.
Again, yeah, so this will help to clarify, I think, some of the Dr. Cheney questions as well. So I had asked the building principals, I'd asked the departments and the building principals to submit to be a hypothetical $15,000. And so this was something that was on Mrs. Bernard's list. Again, we're constantly looking to add to our inventory of communication devices for safety. So this doesn't compromise our present level of safety or communication. And then the other thing that we have coming up is we have the Homeland Security audit that is happening in both of our schools this winter. Previously, we've done the audit, I brought it to the board, we've gone into non-public and reviewed it, and the board has said, fund it, right? So what will happen is they will assess our communication capabilities. They'll make a recommendation in January or February. We're gonna bring that to the board, and there's a likelihood that if communication is on there, that we should purchase radios, that we would make a recommendation to the board to do it in January or February, not even wait till July to do it.
I believe there are some school safety grants out there.
There are. So there's, we are just completing the third round of what they call the SAFE grant. So we qualified for funds under round 1. We weren't eligible for round 2. And then we received funds of $100,000 that were specific to the central school. They paid for the remote access cameras, as well as cell phone boosters as well. So whether or not there's a round 4, I have a feeling, given the 4% reduction in department budgets at the state, we may have to wait for that, but you know, we're always looking for money that's coming from the federal government, so certainly keep an eye open for that. And to be clear, if a radio breaks and there is a necessity to replace it because it compromises communication, we're replacing it. There's you know, that's a non-negotiable.
Last question. Those consumable books in the 8th grade. If it's something that's really like needed, obviously we don't want to entertain cutting it.
Mm-hmm.
Is there any stipulation with the publisher? Like, are we allowed to make copies of them? Are there licensing issues that we have to buy every kid a consumable, or can we do them in-house?
We have to be very careful with photocopying from consumables, and I actually just had a conversation with one of our vendors, Math, today about textbooks. Is there any possibility of buying a textbook? And in Math, the answer is no. But there are anthologies available from some ELA companies, and so I would go back to our HMH in this case and find out, is there any way we can get, you know, XYZ chapters in an anthology? This work text for 7th and 8th grade is a combination of anthology and journal. So I'll be looking at that.
So the way that the companies have gone is they moved away from textbooks and they've
Right.
created consumables so that we use them and then we have to rebuy them?
That's right.
Okay. So the 20 years ago when we had the textbooks, and if we're short a textbook, you make copies, that has gone by the wayside.
True. You can
Okay.
make copies of Blackline Masters if you have like the teacher edition that's licensed for that.
Okay.
That's why I
But
asked
you
that
can't make
question.
copies of the student consumables, no.
Okay.
Not legally, no.
Melissa, did you have a question? Yeah.
The HMS word assembly, is that to go towards, is that supporting that?
It would. So I would say probably more generally speaking, it is, you know, to improve school culture. And again, there's still money allotted in the account line. That was something that Mrs. Bernard saw as a priority and increase that line. Part of the comfort with reducing a little bit of that line is like we have, you know, we can rely on our own people in-house, whether that's student-led assemblies or whether that's even some of our own staff, local resources. You know, we have Lori Warnock come in and talk to the students about dangers of vaping. So that's something that, you know, we can trim that back and still get creative about how we deliver that, so. Any other scenario 4 questions? Okay, so moving on to scenario 5. So scenario 5 is the $403,138 that's in scenario 4, and then also includes the HCS Special Education Coordinator. So to be clear, we are not looking to cut this position. This is a newly created position that we filled this summer. It resides in our IDEA grant, so it does not have impact on the operating budget. You know, it is an allowable cost under IDEA. We can keep it in the grant for another year. It's actually been approved by the Department of Ed for inclusion in next year's grant. However, moving it over to the operating budget is going to free up that money in IDEA. Again, to the question earlier about what happens if we have a student who moves in district and there's an absorbent expense for their program, we can supplement with IDEA. So the thought is that we are going to free up money by putting in the operating budget. And I also want to be clear too, this addition in the operating budget is offset by the reduction of the world language teacher. They really, there's a small difference between the two. I think it's about $10,000, but they offset one another. Removing the special education coordinator from the operating budget, there's no longer an offset with the world language teacher, and now that additional $100,000 would not be able to go into the default. And so our default would increase in theory by $110,000. So we go from the ballpark of 850 up to closer to $1 million.
So basically, you're turning a world language teacher into a special ed coordinator, plus a little bit more money. If the budget gets voted down, would the IDA grant still be available afterwards?
I believe so, yeah. So if we go to
default, could we then go back to IDA to keep the position?
Of course.
The position has been secured in the 24-25 IDEA grant as a safety net, so it will be accessible. And it could that activity could be turned into something different if the budget passes and the position is added into the operational budget.
So go ahead.
I would just say this is just one of those things where we're pushing it down the road for this year. We don't want to cut the position. We recognize the value in it being a long-term position. So this would just be taking it and pushing it down, but knowing that we're eventually going to have to absorb it into the budget a year from now, 2 years from now, whenever that happens.
For me, I do not want to create any uncertainty with Charles or whoever if he leaves, if somebody else comes in. Because the reality is, if you create uncertainty in that position, which is highly specialized and takes a while to get up to speed, you're going to suffer every single time, and it's going to make it so it's not as effective. And yeah, I don't want to put that on the table. And I'm really glad that we have the safety net just in case, because I think long term this is important, especially because I hope not, but at some point Francine will probably retire. And putting somebody in a position to be able to step into that role, I think is super important as well.
Unless there's any other questions, I'm going to move on to scenario 6. So scenario 6 would be a $633,138 operating budget reduction. It includes the $523,138 from scenario 5, and that would be a $110,000 reduction for 2 support staff positions.
Are these currently filled support staff positions, or are these ones that we have not been able to fill?
Well, so that's a difficult question to answer. So we have some unfilled support staff positions, but you have to realize that when we're talking about support staff, and that's why at this point we're somewhat non-committal, it is special education paraeducators. It is regular education paraeducators, library assistants, administrative support in the office. So, that support staff is a pretty broad collective bargaining agreement. And so again, it is prudent, especially in November, to hold off on making that determination because we have possible retirements. We have people who may leave at the end of the year. And so my hope would be, number one hope is let's not go there, because I heard the board identify as a priority they didn't want to cut staff. So, but the goal would be to make that reduction through attrition, if possible.
Are we still going to be able to meet our special education requirements if we cut these 2 positions?
Yeah, that's a legal obligation.
Okay. But basically what this would do would be cut the capacity for each, like one person, I'm assuming, from each building, which means you're cutting the capacity for the building to be flexible and versatile and support education.
Yeah, that would be a possibility.
Yeah, and then contractors are way more expensive.
What the
I'm
likely
not-
scenario would be is, so if you go back to our original budget construction for FY '26, we added 2 support staff positions to this budget. We didn't really add them. They were added last year because they were obligations under IDEA. We had students that required that service. So we accounted for them in this budget. What we'd essentially be doing with this cut is we're absorbing those 2 positions in our budget, and we're gonna make it work. And if we had to go to reduction, ultimately, if we got to a place where there was an issue with special education, we have these limited positions, we either need to reassign somebody from regular education, or we need to add it as an additional expense that wasn't budgeted for.
And a lot of,
None of those sound good.
No, I'm really not, I would prefer not to entertain that.
Yep.
and I'm just going to throw this out here. The special education coordinator and these 2 staff support positions are literally the amount, like just about the same money that we just lost from the state this year. So these are the kind of things that if the state continues down that road, it does not support education. That's what we're going to be looking at unless things change.
Great point.
I don't have questions on those, but I do have a couple other additional questions. if
Sure,
that's
go
okay.
for it.
So we talked a little bit about the Pinkerton late bus. That's really not being utilized as something that we can remove potentially. And also, we were looking to figure out how many kids actually used the after-school bus from HMS, which was, again, not something we had available to us until COVID, and I don't know if that's something that's really, there's only a few kids, I don't know if that's something that we should be looking at also removing, because those are pretty significant costs between the 2.
Yeah, and I'm going to let Nicole provide the information about the middle school, and then I can talk more generally about Pinkerton and then our transportation budget.
So I checked in with our after-school program people that run clubs. Right now, our after-school bus is used from the middle school Tuesdays and Thursdays to support homework club, robotics. We have a comic book club, and there's one other club I'm forgetting, I'm sorry. But there's 15 kids that ride regularly. There are sometimes scattered athletes that also get on the bus. Most of the sports teams, the timing doesn't line up with practice and the late bus, so it's not consistently used by athletes, but sometimes we'll have students that stay a little bit later and then hop on the bus.
So, look, I don't know if you have the number available. From what I'm seeing, the cost of that bus is like $10,600+ dollars. Does that seem like a lot for 15 kids to be using? For only 15
That's for the
kids?
year.
So
Yeah.
that's a loaded question, so I'll give you an
Yeah.
honest answer. Our after-school programming is the best, at-risk prevention that you could absolutely ask for. And it's also some of the best extension that you can provide for our kids that just need more, that can't be provided during the regular school day. So to spend $10,000 on a population of kids that just need something different, that's money well spent.
It also creates the opportunity to recruit more. And I think if we're going into an MTS system where we're going to support kids with homework club and stuff like that, and again, it is going to disproportionately affect students that don't have resources at home. That's why they're riding the bus.
Yeah,
I-
no,
I-
it's
listen,
a great question.
I'm not saying
Yeah.
whether
Yeah.
I agree with it or not, I'm
Yeah.
asking the question.
No,
Yeah.
it is a legit question. It also can be said that there are plenty of people in this community that will step up and help each other out with ride sharing and stuff like that. I can only guess. It's probably people that are newer to the community or don't have the time to set those things up or don't have the networking.
I volunteer up to work for my kids, so
Okay,
single parents though, so.
yeah.
And I definitely think we need to continue to monitor it because it stands in stark contrast to Pinkerton. So Pinkerton's ridership has been zero as of recently. And so I actually started having this conversation with the bus company back in October. And so I do think when we look at the expense for Pinkerton of $23,000, and again, this is the bus at Pinkerton, at least my understanding is, has been running for several years. But we need to, what's that? Yeah, so, you know, to expend $23,000 for 0 to 1 ridership, it's just, the juice isn't worth the squeeze. So after the Thanksgiving break, I've instructed the bus company will stop with the service. I don't want to cut the money. I want to keep it in there because if all of a sudden in January or for the spring season there are like teams of athletes that need to get home to Hampstead, we could look to reinstitute it. And then the reason why it's not reflected in the cuts is because I'm getting real down into the weeds here. So we have the 23 for Pinkerton, which was budgeted. We had the expense of a little over $10,000 for the middle school bus last year, and then we only budgeted for $7,000 for the middle school this year because we weren't sure what the need is, but it's there. So I'm anticipating that there'll be some cost overrun in the middle school line. So I want to fund any offset with the Pinkerton money. And then also the bigger, grander scale here is we're spending $2.3 million on transportation. It has consistently been over the last 4 budgets that we have developed. It is consistently an area, whether it's regular ed or special ed, where we have had cost overruns. So taking 23,000 out of transportation when we can anticipate that there's likely to be overruns, it just doesn't seem like that's a smart move.
So do we know if Chester has a late bus?
I don't know. I can find out though.
Because with Fremont coming into Pinkerton, there's a possibility that we could ride share. And if Fremont was going to have a late bus, then we could just pay them per student. And if we barely have any students, then it's really cheap.
Yeah. No, I can certainly check in with the other districts about their.
Is it advertised, the late bus?
So that's a sort of a separate issue because.
So know how many people are aware that it runs. So.
Yeah, and you know, I put something out in a recent communication. It's a tricky thing because we own the busing, but they're Pinkerton students, so getting those communications to our students, like we don't have direct access to all of our Pinkerton families. It's a challenge. Talked with Pinkerton about it, so part of it is sort of around messaging. So that is a piece of it.
I think,
and then, yeah, in high school, you're generally talking about your freshman, sophomore. They tend to try to figure it out because they don't want to take the late bus. And so I think that does contribute to the low ridership as well. So.
Yeah, and if you're in a club at Pinkerton, there's probably another Hampstead kid in the club at Pinkerton that has a car or was going to do a ride, and because they're able to advocate themselves versus younger kids.
Any other questions? So I hand it off to you.
Yeah. So, board members, at this point, we have our scenarios that have been brought forth. Personally, I'm leaning towards scenario 3, the 362,000, based on all of the information that was provided, discussion that we had, kind of weighing the importance of things. But I'm interested to hear the thoughts of anyone else on where you feel in your gut we should land.
I'm going to go with, I'm guessing that none of us want 6 or find 6 and 5 acceptable, and I'd like to make a motion to not accept 6 and 5, so anybody that is watching at home wondering about it can now not wonder about it, if that makes sense.
And I will second that.
We're saying we're not doing 6 and 5. We're not cutting either 6 or 5. basically, we're not going to cut the special education coordinator or the 2 SAT support. I would like to just take that off the table now, so if you're watching at home and you're one of those possible people, I want you to be rest assured that you are not getting taken out of the budget.
But I hear what you're saying, and I don't know that that necessarily needs to be a motion. The motion that we would look for is, and then that would have discussion associated, would be someone saying what
All right,
level.
so I guess the question is anybody in favor of taking out 5 or 6?
Someone would have to make a motion for scenario 5 or 6.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. All right,
So,
good.
so my 2 cents would be that I agree with Andy on the scenario 3. However, I do think there's items from scenario 4 that could be moved into scenario 3. Not all, but some. And so, like, I'm wondering if it would be, if this is one of those things where we can, as a board, kind of figure out which ones we align on of keeping and removing. And that might be a Google Doc thing that like we've done, you know, to kind of like come up with, you know, which ones we think are, the board is prioritizing keeping or removing.
I think you're getting hyper-specific there, and I think they put a lot of effort into what they're doing and they know what their priorities are. I think if we want to give them a mandate to say cut 10,000 more out of that, I'd be good with it. I don't know.
Well, I'm just, you know, I hear what you're saying, but it's our job as a board member to go through those. So that's what I'm trying to do here, and that's my 2 cents. It doesn't mean everybody agrees with me. I agree.
I do agree. My one concern would be the timing of everything and making sure we can move forward on schedule with putting warrant articles forward on
Right.
time.
Well, when do we need to do that? Because we could say, well, we could ask this to get done this week or
Right.
around Thanksgiving. No, but I mean, I don't know, you could just give a time limit.
So
Be done by.
the other piece could be the board approves the dollar amount. I'm just going to give you, based on what I'm hearing, and I'm not trying to direct your conversation, but if we were to say that, okay, it's all of scenario 3, it's 362,000, and then you'd be looking for $10,000, $15,000 from scenario 4, you would vote to make a motion to reduce the budget by that amount of money. That is a given, right? And that allows us to come back with final numbers for board approval next week. Because anything other than that is just going to extend and would require us to hold a special meeting. No, yeah, next meeting, December 10th.
Oh, yeah, that does make sense. Yeah. Okay, it adds up. All right.
I would suggest having the discussion over microphone.
Yes. So, what was just proposed, Carl? Okay. We'll make a motion.
Yeah, that would be.
I will make a motion to move forward with the scenario 3, 362,000 budget reduction plus an additional $20,000.
Okay, so basically, so basically what you're proposing is a reduction in the proposed operating budget of $382,000.
That is correct.
Okay.
But I think the clarification in that is the items shown in scenario 1, 2, and 3 have to be part of those cuts.
Yes, so if you look at scenario 3 is all of 1
So, right.
Yeah.
and
It's
2.
all that plus that.
Perfect. So I think we just don't want to see that come back
Yeah.
and then pull
Yeah.
issues.
So scenario
Right.
3 plus 20,000 additional,
Badges only.
I'm
or
joking.
from just 20,000 additional.
Yeah. Move
20,000, yeah.
totally.
Yeah.
380.
And the motion will include the caveat that you will come back to us with proposals of basically where we can
What the additional $20,000
have
for
a
the cuts
say
will
in
be.
what the additional
Yeah, and
20,000
yeah.
is.
Yes, I would welcome your
The
feedback.
least, yeah, the least the least impactful, which I know is tough because you're already asking me to do a lot, but, I think there's some in there that I
Yeah,
think will.
and I do want to point out too, and that this is why I kind of focus on that bottom number, because even with me coming back next week and saying this is how we would intend to spend the money, that could change next week. And I used the example of the lawnmower, right? We cut the lawnmower out. It was a $100,000 reduction we cut out. We're buying the lawnmower. So if you were to approach it from a micro level where the board decides on individual items, I have ignored your directive. No, it was a $100,000 deduction, and I hear what you're saying, and I really will strive to honor anything that you tell me. But at the end of the day, if our needs change as we go into fiscal year 26, I may need to purchase one of the items I told you I was going to cut, and I may need to cut one of the items that I told you that I would keep. So, and I say this because if you see our tech people walking around with a T-shirt that says Hampstead School District, I don't want you to be angry.
Do not want to see them walking around with a t-shirt, a jacket, a sweatshirt, and all other apparel because it's not necessary.
All right. I'll
like
tell
Sure,
them.
I can do
That's
it.
for
One
staffing.
item per day.
There you go.
So
So you made a motion for
I
that?
made a motion.
Can we, I'm going to turn, Jeff had a, do you want to?
Oh, okay. So 380,000 cuts is approximately 2% lower than the current voted budget.
Is it? Okay.
Almost watching.
2%. Jeff,
So
can you
the
explain?
operating budget that we have proposed this evening, that we'll call draft 2, is down 1.08% from last year's budget, just the operating budget. We're not talking about the other warrant articles.
Yeah.
So what Jeff is saying is, with your $382,000 additional reduction, that brings us to, we are 2% lower this year than we were this time last year when we were having the conversation about the operating budget.
Any questions or concerns? Okay. All right, so I did make a motion to move forward with the 382,000. I do need a second on that. Any other questions around budget? All approved.
So I'll send out that scenario 4 so the board can give me individual feedback. I'll bring that feedback. And then also with, what we're potentially looking at for the additional reductions. And just know, like, between now and then, there could be other reductions that could come up. So that could get added into the mix, so.
Okay. Moving forward, we do have the 2025 draft warrant review. So board members, in your packets, you should see some sample warrants here.
Can we do this though, at this point?
Well, so, great question.
Or can we table it?
At this point, where we are asking for additional cuts to be made to the budget, I do not think we're at a place to make motions to move forward with any warrant articles. People feel differently, so I would say that we would push those to the next meeting. My goal with this section was really just to kind of educate the public on what articles are potentially out there.
I think it may be worth it to have a discussion about capital reserve so we know kind of where we all are now, and then we can think about it for the next meeting.
Okay.
Is that on here?
Yeah.
Oh, it's in the back.
Yeah,
I
it
would've
is.
got it. Okay.
I think that we should drop that back down. I don't think that putting $1 million in it is going to be sustainable again.
I would agree.
So I would.
Yeah, I totally agree. I'm nowhere near
I would
100.
Drop
I'm
that
nowhere.
back down to the 150.
Yeah, that's in my head 150, which is half of the septic.
That's what it's been historically,
Yeah.
when we upped it,
Yeah.
so I think we can put that back down. That would be my suggestion.
Yeah.
We can always we need to rebuild, but it's not gonna be as quickly as.
Yeah. I also think with how unstable statewide funding is, I think being as conservative as possible this year, and then having a proper understanding of how the funding changes might be for next year is the way we should go.
And just to be clear, that would mean that the first 150,000 of surplus would be returned to the taxpayers. So just wanted to make that clear. Any questions or concerns? We're not gonna, we'll table it for the next
Yeah.
meeting, but
I only
any concerns with moving forward with that 150,000?
thought is if we're reducing this much this year and then next year it looks bigger because we're adding things back in. But I don't know. I do think we should reduce it this year, especially in the climate. I guess I'm just worried about if it, all of a sudden next year everyone's like, why is it so big?
I think giving certainty to the taxpayers this year to get a feel for their budgets with the big increase and trying to do that, and then getting feedback from the taxpayers what they'd be amenable in the following year. And also, we're going to get into what the long-term projections are, but we're going to be another year closer to have a better understanding of what our needs are going to be for cap reserve long-term.
Yeah, I view this as one way that we can make our community feel heard. So I think we've all gotten enough feedback.
And I'm in agreement. I'm just making the case that like it might be a problem later.
It is a very valid thing. I would say too that if you are a prospective school board member, because we do have a seat coming up next year, unless Erin wants to run again, but she can't say because you're not allowed to campaign in public. But if you are a prospective school board member and you want to know what it's like and stuff like that, feel free to reach out to any of us. I'm sure we will be able to talk about it.
So, any other questions on the warrant articles?
Do we have to vote to table that, or?
Nope.
Okay.
No, just to let the public know the deliberative session will be on February 4th, 2025 at 7 p.m. Moving on to the 2024-25 NESDEC enrollment projections. Mrs. Tomaselli.
So here we have a little Canva infographic with our NESDEC information. I've given you a photocopy of this that's not, I don't believe it's in color, but, and it's very tiny font, but there's a red circle around our pre-K through 8 projected enrollment over the next 10 years. I did take the liberty to put this into a bar chart at the bottom of the page as well, just to make it a little bit more visual for you. So our current enrollment this year is 826 students. You can see that that's going to stay pretty level for the next 3 years, and then it's going to jump up a little bit in 27-28. And then we will hover around 900 students for a few years, and then by the time we get to 2034, we will have approximately 1,000 students. I'm just going to scroll down for 1 second. Okay, so this is the graphic. I just kind of blew up those numbers. So NESDEC is a service we use. We provide them all of our current enrollment information. They look at our historical enrollment, they look at birth rates, and they give us some projections. And they're usually pretty accurate, especially within the first 3 to 5 years. But birth rates have increased by 17 children from the previous 10-year average of 59 per year to 76 in Hampstead. So by the year 2030, they're projecting a 100 student increase, and by 2034, they're projecting a 200 student increase. and that is pre-K through 8th, so that really isn't even our encompassing some of the 9 through 12 projections. If you do look at the column all the way to the right, you will see a slight drop in 9 through 12 in the next 10 years. But honestly, that's so negligible, I would not even really, it's within 5 to 10. I wouldn't consider that as a substantial decrease. If you do the math out, you'll see we have 176 additional students kind of projected in 10 years, which is just to do some math, it's an 18% increase. Are there any questions?
So for me, the big number that stands out is the K4.
Mm-hmm.
So basically, in the next 4 years, which is fairly highly predictable, we're looking at getting 20 more students into the central school. At year 5, they're showing a 40 student jump.
Mm-hmm.
That feels a little perspective to me versus, I don't know how good that information is, but even if it's, say, a 20 student jump, if it's half that. So if you're looking at, in 5 years, 40 more students into the elementary school, that's why we keep having the conversation long term about needing more room.
I just worry about class sizes.
No. The minimum requirements of education eliminated class size. We
We
do.
have a policy.
Yeah.
We've been tasked with bypassing it due
Correct.
to lack of space.
Several times. Yeah.
For me, the absolute high is always 25. The research says once you go over 25 kids per class, it drops off a cliff. And it's not great over 20, but that's...
25 makes me feel really uncomfortable.
And 25, by the way, in an elementary school is even a bigger jump. Once you go in high school, 25 is okay. In middle school, it's a lot. When you go to elementary school, the lower you go, the harder it is. And when we talked about early intervention, the smaller the class size, the better off we are, the less students need additional services, intervention, special ed. If you don't spend the money up front in elementary, you pay for it on the back end even more.
All right. Board members, any other questions regarding NESDEC projections?
Could I make a respectful suggestion?
Absolutely.
Given the late hour to the holiday, could we perhaps look at the 2 collective bargaining items and table the rest?
Sure.
I think, is New Hampshire off tomorrow? New Hampshire's off tomorrow for school, right? So
Oh, do you have
I'm the
school?
only one that has to go to work tomorrow.
Just
so-
you.
Yeah, so. But I think
We're not
everyone
even
else
at
wants
10
to-
yet, but
Everyone
yeah.
else wants to start their holiday.
Yeah, we're not doing that.
So yeah,
That's a former chair.
I think we should set a record.
I think we have 1 to ratify and 1 update on.
Oh, yeah. No, we got out of here at 11:30 or 11:45 one time. How about we do the negotiations and then we do the personnel and superintendent's report? And
That's what I,
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah. And we don't need to hear about the late bus or the late start, whatever.
The only thing I would say is with policy, because first read, you are kind of kicking that can down the road, which is not the end of the world, but if you did go through policy, at least get first read out of the way, it doesn't require substantive discussion for first read other than by short notice to the community.
I didn't make a formal motion, but I'm fine kicking it down the,
Okay.
for a month.
I'm personally fine kicking it down the road. I want to be able to be thorough with those policies.
Right.
That's a good point.
yeah, I'm good with that.
And an update on these.
Okay. Do we need a motion to?
Do we need a motion to alter the agenda? Okay.
All right, I will do that. So I will make a motion that we continue with item 3F and 3G of tonight's agenda and table the rest until our next regularly scheduled meeting.
I think we have to do board comments and correspondence. I believe that's part of.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. I will accept your friendly amendment.
Thank you. I will second your motion.
All right, wasting time here, no, just kidding.
Yeah, no.
Any questions? All approved.
Thank you.
Okay. Moving on to the HESPA tentative agreement.
All right, I can start with this and then I can move it over to Jeff, but this should be quick. We had some really great meetings with the HESPA group, and we have come up with, we call it agreed on.
Side part.
Yeah, everybody's signed. So we had some language changes, and we did add an incentive for keeping up with licensing to help the district save on certain costs. So we have, when we have an electrical or plumbing or something like that, we've been, because of this group, we've been able to keep that in-house, which is saving us a ton of money. So we put that, an agreement in there for them to keep up their licensing so we could continue with that, because it's really a very huge benefit to the district. I just want to, I don't know if you want to add anything, Jeff, but or Rich, but I want to say that I really appreciate this group very much. They did not receive any sort of increases during that whole period of COVID. They were not, because they have a 4-year agreement that happened to happen right before that. So they haven't gotten any cost of living increases. They've gotten, so all of the inflation, all of this, they were not, they didn't get their cost of living increases for that. But I appreciate them so much because they just do their job and they're happy to do it and they are pleasant about it and they do a wonderful, wonderful job. And they're very supportive of our schools and our students and our staff. So we're happy to have come to this agreement, and I think that's...
Yeah, I can add a little bit more if you'd like.
Sure, absolutely.
Some of our stipends are annual stipends, which we are now making weekly, hourly, however you want to put it, to give us the flexibility. For example, if we have a groundskeeper receiving a groundskeeper stipend, that we can pivot employees during the summer to be able to do that work and provide them with the stipend as well. And so that allows us a lot more flexibility, I think, among staff to be able to do that. We will offer a medical insurance buyout in order to incentivize more of our staff to opt out. Currently 500, that's going to go to 3,000, with the idea being that that's the number that you would need to offset a deductible on a higher deductible plan that a spouse or partner may have that they may be able to participate in. So we're helping just to cover that cost, which will hopefully save us quite a bit on insurance costs if we have some opt-outs. We adjusted the starting salary to be more competitive for new staff. We are providing a $2.60 increase for all staff in 25-26, $1 in 26-27, and each year through 28-29. Shift differentials have been will remain the same, but hourly stipends for maintenance go from $3.50 to $4 per hour. The way that it works is all of our staff are hired, except for food service, are hired at a custodial position and compensation level. If they're maintenance, they get a stipend above that. If they're grounds, they get a stipend beyond the custodial as well. So custodial is sort of the base. Maintenance stipend will increase to $4 per hour. Groundskeeper will go from $2.50 to $3.50 per hour. Cafeteria manager stipend will stay the same. Again, we've moved some of our stipends to an hourly basis to allow us to pivot and flex a little bit and allow our staff to operate. We don't need, for example, as many custodians in the summer, so that gives us some flexibility there. We have a a stipend for travel for going to the central office, which is off-site. We will offer reimbursement for licenses because we have been benefiting from our staff having professional licenses, and that should not cost them money because we have been a significant beneficiary of the services that they've been able to provide for us in district, and just things that they've been able to pick up on, detect, and correct before we've had to call in major help, and that really needs to be recognized because it is significant value to the district. We had some language changes involving hiring, that sort of thing. Year one, so it's going to be a 4-year agreement. Year one, which is 25 to 26, the number for the warrant article is $99,001. 26, 27, it's $64,601. 27, 28, it's $32,926, and it's the same $32,926 in the 28, 29 school year. So it pains me to say it, but this group has missed all of the inflationary periods through their existing contract. We are getting a bargain with a lot of our employees prior to that inflationary cycle. I'm grateful that we have all of our staff still here, and we do need to correct that and to pay them what they should be earning. It's possible that they may not be at market even at the end of 4 years, but this will go a long way, I think, toward helping to recognize the service that our custodial, maintenance, and groundskeeping staff, cafeteria staff provide to the district. Are there any questions?
No. Happy to hear that you all came to an agreement with all your hard work. Do you want to put forward the motion?
Oh, what does the motion have to say?
That you want to ratify the...
I will make a motion to ratify the tentative agreement with HSPA.
HSPA.
This is what I tried to say, but this is about HSPA.
Second.
Oh. Any questions or comments?
I'm really glad that all the per hour numbers will start with a 2 by the time this contract is done.
All approved. Okay. Moving on to the update on HEA, the tentative agreement. So last week we had our 4th meeting, and unfortunately we were not able to come to an agreement. HEA did elect to move to impasse, and we will head into mediation in the next few weeks. So we are hopeful that we can eventually come to an agreement through this mediation process. That's where we are.
Mediation. I don't think there's been an impasse per se. I just think that we're going to mediation.
Yeah, we're not yet.
I believe on the 17th.
Yes,
right?
we are moving to mediation. We have not gone to impasse yet.
It's technical, don't worry about it.
Okay.
Impasse means that we have no agreement and we're not going to have an
Oh.
agreement. Mediation means that we
you.
have
My bad.
concluded negotiations with just ourselves, and we are asking a mediator to come in and help us.
Thank you. Forgive my misspeaking. We moved toward mediation. This is not impasse at this point. Moving on to board comments and correspondence. Anyone have anything to share?
I still have people that have reached out to me about the budget, but hopefully tonight will make them feel better about the situation and what's going on.
I'll just say I appreciate the exercise, all the efforts of Bob going through and making those hard decisions to give us those projections, allowing us to ask questions, and I think the board did a great job asking questions tonight, so kudos to all of you. Yeah.
I think, Mr. Chairman, it sounds like you might be concluding soon. I just wanted to share, I know it's on the agenda, not to go into it fully, but the HES the infill classrooms are complete and nearly complete, but we have a certificate of occupancy, which Dr. Cheney has in her possession, and I personally witnessed things being moved into those classrooms today.
Excellent news.
So it's great news.
Great.
Wanted to
Thank
share
you.
that. Good note.
Thanks so much for sharing. All right, at this point, we will adjourn the meeting at 9:41 p.m. Thank you all.